just to remind anybody who has not heard of this story, who's fortunate enough not to have heard of it, it all started yesterday when Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, again, I think one of the most unscrupulous operatives in all of DC media, published this article after the Trump bombing campaign in Yemen resumed. The Biden administration had been bombing Yemen throughout 2024, despite during the campaign, Trump saying he opposed the bombing, thought it was unnecessary. He decided to resume it and even escalate it. Jeffrey Goldberg published this article, "The Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plans. U.S. national security leaders included me in a group chat about upcoming military strikes in Yemen. I didn't think it could be real. Then the bombs started falling." So he essentially revealed and showed screenshots of the chat that he had been included by Mike Waltz into what is obviously an extremely sensitive conversation that for some reason took place over the commercial app Signal that everybody uses for free, even though the government spends billions of dollars developing highly secure, encrypted communication for national security discussions. They decided to use Signal, and they accidentally put Jeffrey Goldberg into their planning about how they were going to bomb Yemen, which is obviously a secret, what aircraft they were going to use to bomb Yemen, what time the bombing was going to start. And that's what Jeffrey Goldberg revealed. And obviously what had happened was Mike Waltz had accidentally added him to the group, but and of course that's not the sort of information to which a journalist, especially a hostile journalist, but really no journalist, this is clearly classified information, highly sensitive, secret information, the government planning a bombing campaign. It's actually illegal to provide that information to someone who's not authorized to receive classified information, which is Jeffrey Goldberg. And yet they did it by accident, presumably, and they should have just said that. So instead of that, the Trump administration, once Waltz came out and denied that he ever talked to Jeffrey Goldberg, didn't even think he had his contact in his phone, didn't understand how it happened, claimed that an investigation is needed to see what occurred here. The Trump administration went on the offense, even though they were the ones who clearly made a mistake, and began denying that there was anything sensitive about this information. That there was nothing sensitive about planning, debating, and then planning when to start a bombing campaign in Yemen, how to start the bombing campaign in Yemen. I just want you to think for a second about what would have happened had Jeffrey Goldberg published the entire chat with all of these details we're going to show you were in the chat, operational details, prior to the U.S. going and bombing Yemen. Do you really believe that a single person in the Trump administration would have said, oh, that's no big deal that Jeffrey Goldberg published these detailed war plans about when we were going to send our service members in harm's way, what aircraft they would use, what time they would start bombing? They would probably charge Jeffrey Goldberg under the Espionage Act and arrest him immediately. At the very least, they would have described this as a incredibly reckless and disloyal and unpatriotic, treasonous thing to do by a reporter, because of course this information is sensitive. It was only once they realized that Jeffrey Goldberg had it because they gave him access to it, did they start trying to insult your intelligence by trying to tell you there's nothing at all sensitive or classified about any of this information. Here's Pete Hegseth speaking on Fox News about all this.
Full workday here as well, and looking forward to it. One question.
Can you share how your information about war plans against the Houthis in Yemen was shared with a journalist in The Atlantic? And were those details classified?
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does. I would love to comment on the Houthi campaign because of the skill and courage of our troops. I've monitored it very closely from the beginning. And you see, we've been managing 4 years of deferred maintenance under the Trump administration. Our troops, our sailors were getting shot at as targets. Our ships couldn't sail through. And when they did shoot back, it was purely defensively or at shacks in Yemen. President Trump said, no more. We will reestablish deterrence. We will open freedom of navigation, and we will ultimately decimate the Houthis, which is exactly what we're doing as we speak from the beginning, overwhelmingly.
Why were those details shared on Signal, and how did you learn that a journalist was privy to the targets, the types of weapons used?
I've heard I was characterized. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that. Thank you. Appreciate it.
The NSC said it was authentic.
Nobody was texting war plans, he said. And this has been the line from the Trump administration. No, there was nothing in there that's sensitive. No big deal that we shared it with the journalists. And in fact, I agree with everything Pete Hegseth has said about Jeffrey Goldberg. I think he's one of the most fraudulent, if not the worst, most fraudulent operatives in media. In addition to all the sins Pete Hegseth mentioned, as we've shown you before, it was Jeffrey Goldberg single-handedly who invented the lie that Saddam Hussein had a close alliance with Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda in order to convince Americans of what they needed to be convinced of to support the war in Iraq, which was that Saddam Hussein was somehow involved in the planning of the 9/11 attack, and that's why we had to go in and take him out. Without that lie that Jeffrey Goldberg spread all over the New Yorker and NPR and all the shows that he was asked to come on, he was showered with journalism awards. Without that lie, it would have been much more difficult to convince Americans to support the war in Iraq. And needless to say, none of this has affected Jeffrey Goldberg's standing in corporate media because, as I've said before, it's not just tolerated, it's required if you want to advance in corporate media that you lie on behalf of the U.S. security state. Nobody does that as eagerly or as casually as Jeffrey Goldberg. But given that I agree with everything Pete Hegseth said about him, that provokes the question, why is it that Jeffrey Goldberg, that journalist that Pete Hegseth says is a fraudster and a hoaxer and spreads lies, why was he included in this very small, 16, 17 people, top echelon of national security officials? Why was he included in this group? And therefore made aware of the war planning that took place. Now, it's true that not all of the details of the bombing operation in Yemen were included, but a lot of it was. Here is The Atlantic, who actually was almost forced to reveal more text because Jeffrey Goldberg had said there were details about the operation in here. The Trump administration vehemently denied it, as you just heard Pete Hegseth do, as others have done. And because the Trump administration said there was nothing classified in there, Jeffrey Goldberg had no excuse to withhold it. The government itself, the Trump administration, is saying this isn't classified. So once you call the reporter a liar and claim that what he's claiming is in there really isn't, and that there's nothing classified about it, you have no excuse not to publish it. You're basically duty-bound to do so, and he did. Under this headline, here are the attack plans that Trump's advisors shared on Signal. The administration has downplayed the importance of the text messages inadvertently sent to The Atlantic's editor-in-chief, and then here you can see the text itself. At 11:44 a.m. Eastern Time, Hegseth posted in the chat, in all caps, "Team update." The text began this way, quote, "Time now. Weather is favorable. Just confirmed with CENTCOM we are a go for mission launch." CENTCOM, or Central Command, is the military combatant command for the Middle East. The Hegseth text continues. Set F-18's launch first strike package at 12:15. 13:45, trigger-based F-18's first strike window starts. The target terrorist is, and they mention his name, at his known location, so should be on time. Also strike drones launch, MQ-9s. And then the next set of chats, Hegseth continued. 14:10, more F-18s launch, second strike package. 14:15, strike drones on target. This is when the first bombs will definitely drop pending earlier trigger-based targets. 15:36, F-18 second strike starts, also first sea-based Tomahawks launched. More to follow per the timeline, and then ironically, in retrospect, he added, we are currently clean on OPSEC. That is operational security. So, I'm sorry, but nobody in good faith, nobody trying to be minimally honest, nobody who is anything other than a complete partisan hack would claim that there was nothing sensitive, nothing classified in what Pete Hegseth posted to the Signal group that included Jeffrey Goldberg. You're talking about detailed times of an operation that has not yet begun. The targets of their operation, the aircraft they intend to use, the sequence of events that the attack plan entails. The U.S. government classifies everything, pretty much. I've talked before about how I read through the Snowden archive for 2 years plus. Hundreds of thousands, if not more, top secret and classified documents. They classify everything, including the most banal and ridiculous and routine documents. Here's how you request a vacation. Here's how you get a parking credential. Top secret or classified. The idea, the very idea that detailed war plans to secretly bomb a country is not information that ought to be closely held, that it's fine to share it with whomever, is just an insult to your intelligence, and it is a byproduct of the fact that Mike Waltz decided he won't tell the truth and couldn't tell the truth for reasons we'll get into, so the administration lined up behind him to defend him, and in doing so had to issue some claims that don't even pass the laugh test. Now, I'm not pretending, and I won't pretend, that I'm sitting here worried about whether the government effectively or efficiently protects its secrets. That is not my job. I'm a journalist. If anything, my job is to unearth those secrets, not help the government better hide them. I'm not, this is not, that's why I say I wouldn't even be talking about this if not for the fact that it's ongoing, because the truth just wasn't admitted. Instead, we're getting an avalanche of preposterous claims, and as I'll show you, not just from the government, but from Jeffrey Goldberg as well. Here is a tweet from Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, and she essentially followed up with the same sort of denials of Pete Hegseth. It's clearly part of the strategy. She says, quote, Jeffrey Goldberg is well known for his sensationalist spin. Here are the facts about his latest story. Quote, no war plans were discussed. Come on, what I just showed you, are those war plans, attack plans, by any stretch of the imagination, any way to interpret those phrases not to include that information I just cited? And they're trying to claim that Jeffrey Goldberg one day said there were war plans and then the Atlantic were treated to attack plans. There's no difference between those. It's just not true that, quote, no warplanes were discussed in the Signal chat. Number two, no classified material was sent to this thread. How is this information not classified? Number three, the White House counsel's office has provided guidance on a number of different platforms for President Trump's top officials to communicate as safely and efficiently as possible. As the National Security Council stated, the White House is looking into how Goldberg's number was inadvertently added to the thread. Yeah, huge mystery. Thanks to the strong and decisive leadership of President Trump and everyone in this group, the Houthi strikes were successful and effective. Terrorists were killed, and that's what matters most to President Trump. Trump administration officials for the last 2 months have been issuing very flamboyant and aggressive statements about the evils of leaking classified information, saying they have zero tolerance for it. They'll punish anybody who is responsible for it. And now suddenly, because of Mike Waltz's careless mistake at best, they shared secret war plans, secret attack and bombing plans with one of the most hostile anti-Trump media operatives on the planet. And now they resort to, oh, we don't care that much about leaking classified information. We just care that the operation was a success. It was a success because Jeffrey Goldberg opted not to publish what he had learned prior to the bombing campaign. But they had no way of guaranteeing that when they let him into that group. Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, and the CIA Director John Ratcliffe were testifying before Congress yesterday, and both of them took similar positions.
So I'm curious, Did this conversation at some point include information on weapons packages, targets, or timing?
Not that I'm aware of.
Director Gabbard, same question. Timing. And on weapons packages, targets, or timing?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, did you hear that? I mean, whatever you think of the Yemen bombing campaign, however much you love President Trump, here's the CIA director testifying before the Senate. And it's not even an effective lie because, of course, these chats were going to come out. He was asked, was there anything about timing or weapons packages transmitted in this chat? Obviously, John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, read the chat. It's right on his phone before going to testify. He knew what was in there, and yet he still said, not to my knowledge or no. I just read you exactly that, the weapons packages that were going to be used and the timing of the attacks in detail. What is the justification for lying about that? Why would you even do that? That's what I mean. This began as a very trivial matter, and it's become something more significant because of the refusal to tell the truth and just dig in defense of Mike Waltz. Here's the rest of this interrogation.
Director Gabbard, same question.
Same answer, and defer to the Department of Defense on that question.
Well, those are two different answers, but you're saying that was not part of the conversation.
To my knowledge.
The precise operational issues were not part of this conversation.
Correct.
I mean, maybe there is some way to kind of use some kind of a semantic game to try and justify those answers, but they are misleading at best. They should have just said, yes, we were talking about the operation. We did talk about timing. It was a mistake to include a journalist. And period. End of story. It was a mistake. It was careless. We have to take steps to make sure it wouldn't happen. Not going to happen again. That's would have ended the whole thing. Mike Waltz went on Laura Ingraham last night, and I just want to give you this sense for how preposterous this has now become, how insulting so many of these explanations are. Laura Ingraham, to her credit, wanted to know how it is that Jeffrey Goldberg's phone number ended up saved in Mike Waltz's phone and why that happened. Now, I don't know how many of you have used Signal before, but when you open the Signal app, the only people with whom you can start communicating are people who are saved in your phone. You have to have somebody saved in your phone in order to send them a message. You can't just type a random number in. And then if you create a new Signal group that permits you to speak with multiple Signal users at once, you have to add people to your group, and the only options that you have are people whose contacts are saved in your phone. If you want to add somebody whose contact is not saved in your phone, you have to first save their contact in your phone. That's the only way you can add them to a Signal group. I understand why Mike Waltz doesn't want to admit that he had Jeffrey Goldberg's number saved in his phone. Because Jeffrey Goldberg is one of the most dishonest and one of the most vehemently anti-Trump media people in all of Washington. And Trump, Mike Waltz's boss, harbors a severe hatred for Jeffrey Goldberg. As you saw with Pete Hegseth, Trump has said similar things. They hate Jeffrey Goldberg. And if they know that Mike Waltz is chatting with Jeffrey Goldberg or has his contact information saved in his phone, and why would you have that saved in your phone if you weren't actually chatting with him? That would be something that would trigger Donald Trump's rage. Like, you have Jeffrey Goldberg, you talked to Jeffrey Goldberg? And so instead of just admitting that this is what happened, he was too scared to admit that he had Jeffrey Goldberg's phone number saved in his phone. To Laura Ingraham's credit, and I'm not surprised at all that she did it, she's done it many times before, she quite persistently and adversarially questioned Mike Waltz on this very question. I want you to listen to the utter babbling, the preposterous defense, the attempts to justify how this could have happened that came out of Mike Waltz's mouth. Remember, this is the National Security Advisor. the person closest to the president on matters of national security, somebody responsible for possessing and analyzing and safeguarding the most sensitive secrets that our government possesses. Here's his attempt to explain away how he had Jeffrey Goldberg's number in his phone.
And I know him in the sense that he hates the president, but I don't text him. He wasn't on my phone, and we're going to figure out how this happened.
So you don't know what staffer is responsible for this right now?
Well, look, a staffer wasn't responsible, and look, I take full responsibility. I built the group. My job is to make sure everything's coordinated.
But how did the number? I mean, I don't mean to be pedantic here, but how did the number?
Have you ever had somebody's contact that shows their name, and then you have somebody else's number there?
I never make those mistakes.
Right? You got somebody else's number on someone else's contact. So, of course, I didn't see this loser in the group. It looked like someone else. Now, whether he did it deliberately or it happened in some other technical mean is something we're trying to figure out.
So your staffer did not put his contact information.
No,
but how did it end up in your phone?
That's what we're trying to figure out.
Okay, but that's a pretty big problem.
That's what we've got the best technical minds, right?
That's disturbing.
And that's where, I mean, I'm sure everybody out there has had a contact where it was said one person and then a different phone number.
But you've never talked to him before, so how's the number on your phone? I mean, I'm not an expert in any of this, but it's just curious. How's the number on your phone?
Well, if you have somebody else's contact and then somehow it gets
someone
sucked
sent
in,
you that
it gets
contact.
sucked in.
Was there someone else supposed to be on the chat that wasn't on the chat that you thought was?
So
on
the
the chat?
person that I thought was on there was never on there. It was this
Who
guy.
was that? What person?
Well, I'm not. Look, okay. Laura, I take responsibility. I built the group.
Okay.
So but look, that's the part that we have to figure out.
We have to convene all of the greatest technological minds and the scientists and the computer experts and security experts from all around the world to investigate how it possibly could be the case that Jeffrey Goldberg's contact information and phone number was stored in Mike Waltz's phone, sufficient to allow Mike Waltz to put him into the Signal group. And when Laura Ingraham said to him, what do you mean? Like, how did the number get saved in your phone if you never talked to him? Like, how did it get saved there? He's like, oh, well, what happens is, I'm sure you had this experience. It's like, sometimes this contact you have saved has a totally different number of a different, has that ever happened to you? But then she still said, like, okay, given that's the case, Jeffrey Goldberg's phone number and contact information ended up in your phone. And it was identified as Jeffrey Goldberg. The graphic in the Signal chat said JG, which is Jeffrey Goldberg's initials. And he said, oh, yeah, what happens is, like, when this happens, the number gets sucked in. It gets sucked in. It's totally what happens. Like, the iPhone, like, oh, yeah, so many times. You know, there are these people who I don't want to talk to, who I'm not supposed to talk to, but my iPhone just sucks in their contact information and their name. And I'm like, oh my God, how did they get in my contacts? How did that happen? How do I have their phone number and their name in my, the phone sucked it in. Like, sucked it in from where? It's laughable. It's ridiculous. It's insulting that they would continue this preposterous charade. From the beginning, Mike Waltz says he doesn't know who Jeffrey Goldberg is. He's never talked to Jeffrey Goldberg. Oh, by the way, here is another image that The Atlantic released today. Jeffrey Goldberg, in his original story, said that he was added to the chat group, that he got an invitation and added to the chat group by Mike Waltz. And just, for those of you who don't use Signal, if somebody who has your contact information stored in their phone, which again is a prerequisite to adding you to a Signal group, tries to put you into the Signal group, Signal will send you a message saying, this person, Mike Waltz, wants to add you to a Signal group. Do you accept or do you reject? And then once you hit accept, you become part of the group. And the group Signal messages to the entire group that the person who added you is the person who was added by somebody else. So here you see, this is the Houthi PC small group. And let's pull up the highlighter just to show you here. So here's what it says. It says, Mike Waltz added you to the group. This is Jeffrey Goldberg's phone. There were only 19 members. It was intended to be a small group talking about the Houthi operation. And there, the first message is Mike Waltz says, team establishing a principals group for coordination on Houthis, particularly over the next 72 hours. My deputy, Alex Wong, is pulling together a Tiger team at deputy's agency chief of staff level, following up from the meeting. Now, I heard a lot of Trump supporters trying to claim to pin the blame on his assistant or his staffer, Alex Wong. Mike Waltz is willing to say anything to defend himself. You just saw that. But he's not willing to falsely blame Alex Wong. Why, anyway, if you're the national security advisor, would you be handing out your phone, your personal telephone, to staffers and they have just access to it? They can go in and like delete contacts, add contacts, access all your personal information. That's not something a national security advisor should be doing. If that were the explanation, that might even be worse, more reckless. But that's not what happened. It says right here, Mike Waltz added Jeffrey Goldberg to the group. And again, the only way you could do that is if you have Jeffrey Goldberg's number saved in your phone. Now, Mike Waltz has been insisting from the beginning, I don't know Jeffrey Goldberg, I've never met him, I've never talked to him. Here is a photo from October 2021 that people dug up. It's from the French philosopher and warmonger Bernard-Henri Lévy. And on October 29th, 2021, he tweeted, launch of the will to see, thanks Ambassador 18, thanks for being there. And then he goes to the people who were in this. You can see this small group of people. It's about 7 people. Alan Arzi, Bayan Rahman, Jeffrey Goldberg, David Tafari, Michael Waltz, Sinam 56, the Tom Kaplan, Emily Hilton. And you see here, this is Mike Waltz and Jeffrey Goldberg. They are standing right next to each other. Now, I don't know, maybe you've stood next to somebody on a stage before, and even though you work in exactly the same area, Jeffrey Goldberg is a national security reporter, Mike Waltz is a member of Congress who works in national security, who is very well known in DC, has been around forever. There you see the two of them in an up close. Maybe you actually just didn't talk to him, you never remembered this, it's a total coincidence that the person whose contact and number is saved in your phone is somebody that you were about 3 inches from in a small group meeting on a stage. Here is a news story. Mexico extradites 29 drug traffickers to the U.S. to avoid trade tariffs. We all know how deceptive mainstream media can be. They push agendas, censor voices, and make sure that you only see one side of the story. That's exactly why I started this show here on Rumble, because I believe in free speech and real conversations and reporting that entails all sides and ultimately the best pursuit of the truth possible. And it's why I partnered with an app and website that believes in all of those values too. Ground News prioritizes free speech over controlling the narrative. For every news story, you can find all the articles reporting on it worldwide with context, such as if a news source has any political bias, how credible they are, and if any major corporation is influencing their reporting. All I have to do is swipe through coverage with tags indicating if it's coming from a liberal or conservative source or from corporate or independent voices. And from there, I can decide for myself if Mexico's unprecedented extradition of 29 cartel members to the U.S. is proof that Trump's tariff tactics are really working, like some conservative sources report, or if it's just a routine legal process and one of the cartel members pled not guilty anyway, like the center and the left are saying. Different sources say different things. If I had just read one of those sources, I'd have a completely skewed view of reality. But with Ground News, I could put them side by side and decide for myself who's actually telling the truth. Ground News even created a dedicated feed called Blind Spot that exposes stories that neither side of the political spectrum is reporting on, making it impossible, or rather making it possible to spot stories that people in charge don't want you to see. Ground News is bringing back transparency in the news and civil discourse right from your phone or computer. Best of all, they're independent and subscriber supported, and they're offering my viewers 40% off the same Vantage plan I use to get unlimited access to all of their features. So if you scan the QR code that we're showing you, you can check them out, and you can also go to ground.news/GG for 40% off. If you like this show, I am quite confident you will love that platform. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.